So the story of Jephthah, it spans chapters 10 through 12 in the book of Judges. And if it were a play, it would be a 3-act tragedy. It starts awful. It has a few sort of hopeful spots in Act 2, and then it ends heartbreakingly. Act 1 opens with God's people so out of control that God's even lost his patience. Act 2 is a story of a man, Jephthah, that is so haunted by his wounds of the past, and Act 3 is outright civil war. And here's what I'm hoping that happens tonight, that maybe you'll see yourself in one or more of these acts. It could come in the form of a warning, maybe possibly some self-discovery, or maybe the realization that you need to make a change in order so that your life is not a tragedy. So let's begin. Act 1 here. It's found in chapter 10, book of Judges. In your notes up on the screens, verse 6. The people of Israel again did what was right, or what was evil in the sight of the Lord. And they served the Baals and the Ashtaroth, the gods of Syria, the gods of Sidon, the gods of Moab, the gods of the Ammonites, and the gods of the Philistines. And they forsook the Lord and did not serve him. So the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel. Are you picking this up here? The Deuteronomic cycle that we've been talking about in this series is going right to work right here in this text. So the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel, and he sold them into the hands of the Philistines and in the hands of the Ammonites. And they crushed and oppressed the people of Israel for a year. For 18 years they oppressed all the people of Israel who were beyond the Jordan in the land of the Amorites, which is Gilead. The Ammonites crossed the Jordan to fight against Judah and against Benjamin and against the house of Ephraim, so that Israel was severely distressed. And the people of Israel cried out to the Lord, saying, "We have sinned against you because we have forsaken our God and have served the Baals." Now, if you remember, what has always happened in the cycle when the people cry out? Right, God raises up a deliverer. He has compassion. And the Lord said to the people of Israel, "Did I not save you from the Egyptians and from the Amorites and from the Ammonites and from the Philistines? The Sidonians also and the Amalekites and the Maonites oppressed you, and you cried out to me, and I saved you out of their hand. Yet you have forsaken me and served other gods. Therefore I will save you no more. Go and cry out to the gods with whom you've chosen. Let them save you in the time of your distress." God's people are now practically worshiping every other god and every other nation in the region. That they've taken turning from God to epic proportions. And the Deuteronomic cycle there, it repeated itself, right? You sort of picked it up. They turn, God's anger, oppression. This time it's the Philistines and the Ammonites that attacked, and the nation of Israel cries out. However, this time God's response is different, right? I will save you no more. Go cry to someone else. Wow. Seriously, just sit in that for a minute. Could this be possible? That God can indeed lose all patience with us to the point where he really says, "No, I've had enough. I'm done." Well, clearly the answer is yes, because he just did, right? To what depths has the nation of Israel sunk that they would receive such a harsh response from God? What would bring him to the point with his nation, or maybe even more significant, what could bring him to the point with me or with you to say, that's enough? Well, let's look. You know, the book of Proverbs, it compares wisdom on one hand and folly on the other. And in this book, when you dig deep into it, you can discern sort of 4 loose categories or 4 types of people distinguished by the way they respond and react to God. First category is sort of wise people. These are the people filled with wisdom. They respect and fear the Lord. They're seeking after him with all their heart, and they're trying to do that in a God-honoring way. That's the wise. Over here, we have the 3 remaining descriptions or variations or shades of foolishness or folly. And I'm going to touch briefly on these 3 with you here. And let me just say this, I want to warn you. My guess is I may offend a few of you. You know, if you're a person that's easily offended, you might even get mad at me as I go through these with you. You might start having those conversations in your head where you give me a piece of your mind. I just want you to know I'm okay with that because I'm your pastor, and I'm not trying to be your favorite uncle, right? So could I ask you to listen to these three categories closely and be honest with yourself? Have you opted for one of them? And please, let this be about you. As I go through this, don't be elbowing the person beside you and saying, pay attention, he's talking to you right now, right? So when it comes to following God, this first of these three categories is this, it's the simple. The reason why you're in this category is very often you're just too young to know any better. This is the naive person. That they are not bad or evil or dumb or trying to get their lives ruined. They're just clueless. The simple person lacks what the older person has, experience. And from the words of Taylor Swift, and yes, I'm going to quote a Taylor Swift lyric here, when you're 15 and someone tells you they love you, you're going to believe them. You're not going to believe them because you're dumb or you're a bad person. You're going to believe them because you're 15. See, this is not a criticism. This is a warning. Simple people, as the Bible puts it, often hear God's wisdom or the wisdom of an experienced God follower, and they say, nothing bad's going to happen to me. Come on, man, I got this handled. I got it. You're just being paranoid or overprotective. See, simple people have not faced the consequences of poor decisions. Therefore, you're not afraid of anything. You've never had your heart torn to pieces. You've never been addicted to anything. And listen, if you're young and inexperienced, I know it's hard because you think you know so much. And when someone like me stands up here and tells you that you don't, you start having that mental conversation in your head with yourself. What does this old geezer think he knows about me standing up here and talking to me? He has no idea what I know and don't know. You know, 12 years ago when I came here as the family ministry pastor, leader, Doug Melder was right out of college. He was my senior high intern at the time. And during a talk to middle schoolers, he showed a film clip from Saving Private Ryan. The scene where the one soldier slowly kills the other soldier with a bayonet. That's right, to a group of middle schoolers, he showed that. Doug was simple. He lacked experience. And I fielded upset parents' calls for 2 weeks. Homeschooler moms with aprons in one and textbooks in the other were extremely upset. Some of those middle school kids are probably still in counseling, right? But see, Doug gained experience. He wouldn't do that again. And actually what Doug's doing now is he's pouring wisdom into our emerging leaders on our team. Some of them who are simple in certain areas. Proverbs 14:15 says this, the simple believes everything, but the prudent or the wise gives thought to his steps. Proverbs 22:23, the prudent sees danger and hides himself, but the simple go on and suffer it. Simple people, can I say something important to you? You can have it both ways. And us old geezers, we're really sort of jealous of you. Because you can have the great things of youth. Stay up late, wear your skinny jeans, hang out at coffee shops all day, right? And you don't have to allow simple and inexperience to wreck your lives. Simple. You don't have to learn everything the hard way. You can have your youth and have your wisdom if you will seek God and listen to the more experienced followers of God. But that takes humility, and that's on you. So the second category is what the Bible calls the fool. And the difference between the simple and the fool is the fool knows, right? He or she has experience, but he doesn't care. You know, the conversation would go something like this. Don't you know that's going to hurt you? Yes. But you're going to do it anyhow? Yes. Why? Because I don't care. It's fun. I don't give a rip. When you did that in your first marriage, it did not go well for you, and you're going to do that again? Yes. I don't care. Thank you for that information, but it's none of your business. The Bible calls that person a fool. Some people in this room are having that conversation in your head with me right now, and you're saying, I don't care. It's none of your business. It's my life. I'll do what I want. Proverbs 26:11 is one of the most disgusting verses in the Bible, and it says this, like a dog returns to his vomit is a fool who repeats his folly. We can all see this in other people, can't we? But it's hard to admit this about ourselves. A fool knows the difference between right and wrong and simply does not care. A fool, maybe has suffered the consequences of right and wrong, but they don't care. And the cure for simple is time. Just time and experience. You know what the cure for a fool is? Tragedy. They have to learn the hard way. You can't teach them. And a fool will often say this, I'm not hurting anyone, so I can do what I want. Well, that's simply not true, because eventually the tragedy of a fool will hurt someone else. It may not have been their intention. They may not have meant to hurt someone, but your parent's heart that is broken, your wife and kids left behind, your household in financial ruin, someone in a hospital because you plowed into them with your car while you were drinking, others do get hurt. The last category, and this is going to bring us back to the book of Judges, the Bible calls these individuals the mockers, or sometimes they're referred to as the scoffers. Not only do they know the difference between right and wrong and don't care, this is the person that scoffs or mocks at those trying to honor God. This is the person that you invite to church, and not only do they turn down your invitation, they laugh at you because you're going to church. They inform you that you're weak-minded, you're stupid, you're old-fashioned, you're unenlightened. How can you believe in that nonsense? This is the person that is critical and condescending. They try to come across like the smartest person in the room to control their view through cynicism and criticism. And if you're that person, I pity you. And I know right now you're having an unpleasant conversation with me in your head. See, Proverbs 9:7 says this, whoever corrects a mocker invites insults. As soon as you bring something up about God, a mocker will pounce on you and insult you. And they are not necessarily just atheists or agnostics. I know some folks that do not believe in God, but they don't scoff or mock him either. Some mockers, I think, even believe in God, maybe even believe in Jesus, but they think that should not interfere or have nothing to do with the way they live. You can't win with a mocker. Proverbs 22 says this, that wisdom says, drive out a scoffer, and strife will go out, and quarreling and abuse will cease. There is nothing you can do. They're not interested in knowledge. Whether it's insecurity or arrogance, they will mock God. And Galatians 6:7 says, do not be deceived, because God is not mocked. For whatever one sows, that he will also reap. Who is God speaking to in Judges 10 when he says, I will save you no more. Go and tell the other gods that you've been worshiping. I believe he's talking to the mocker. I believe that the nation of Israel was mocking and scoffing God with their outrageous and insulting behavior. And God says, that's enough. I won't be mocked. See, if there are any simple folks in the room, and I know that's a harsh term, but the Bible said it, seek God's wisdom. Like seriously, follow trusted God followers. Fools, please, before tragedy strikes and you hit rock bottom, turn to God. And then lastly, if there happens to be a mocker here today, please know that someday you will stand before God and have to give an account. And I wish you well in that interview. Act 1 of this sort of play that we're going to walk through ends tragically. God has lost his patience with his people. Act 2 now, chapter 11, and we are introduced to our judge. Now Jephthah the Gileadite, he was a mighty warrior, but he was the son of a prostitute. Gilead was the father of Jephthah, and Gilead's wife also bore him sons. And when his sons grew up, they drove Jephthah out and said to him, "You shall not have an inheritance in our father's house, for you are the son of another woman," prostitute, a harlot. Then Jephthah fled from his brothers and lived in the land of Tob, and worthless fellows collected around Jephthah and went out with him. I want to just pause just for a second, make sure that we got this. Let me just unpack this with you for a second. Right, don't miss this. Jephthah's mother was a prostitute. Jephthah was the result of his father's one-night stand. And his father then had children with his wife. And when those children grew up, they drove Jephthah out of his inheritance, of his legacy. You know, and I just wonder if Jephthah's dad on the way over to that prostitute that night wasn't saying to himself, "I don't care. It's my life. I know it might be wrong, but I'm not hurting anybody." Someone got hurt. Someone got wounded. A fool's behavior hurts people. Verse 4, after a time, the Ammonites made war against Israel. And when the Ammonites made war against Israel, the elders of Gilead, these might even been some of Jephthah's brothers, went to bring Jephthah from the land of Tob, and they said to Jephthah, "Come and be our leader, that we might fight against the Ammonites." Now, the next thing that happens is Jephthah basically negotiates a deal to regain some of his inheritance, some of his legacy back. And then he tries to negotiate a peace deal with the Ammonites, but the talks break down, and Jephthah is now headed to battle against the Ammonites. He's leading Israel to war. And in verse 29, it says this, "Then the Spirit of the Lord was upon Jephthah." Now, please don't miss that. It says the Spirit of the Lord is upon him. So Jephthah has the Spirit of God upon him. He is walking to battle with God's favor and blessing. And he passed through Gilead and Manasseh, and passed on to Mizpah of Gilead, and from Mizpah of Gilead, he passed on to the Ammonites. So he's getting ready for war. And Jephthah made a vow to the Lord and said, "If you will give the Ammonites into my hand, then whatever comes out of the front doors of my house to meet me when I return in peace from the Ammonites shall be the Lord's, and I will offer it up as a burnt offering." Despite having God with him, he decides that that's not enough. Unbelievably. And he makes this foolish vow. "God, if you give me victory over the Ammonites, when I get back, whatever comes out the front door of my house is yours. I'll offer it up as a sacrifice." And in those days, an Israelite house would have included a space sort of in the front of the house, first floor, front side, that would have been a place where the animals would have lived. And most scholars believe that Jephthah believed that what would come out of his house first was a lamb, or a goat, or an ox. So he goes and wins the battle decisively. Of course he did, because God was already with him, and he returns home and something tragically and shocking happens. Verse 34, "And behold, his daughter came to meet him with tambourines and with dances. She was his only child, and besides her, he had neither son nor daughter." Many take this alarming text at face value and assume that Jephthah maybe actually offered up his daughter as a sacrifice. While this is not impossible, it's not likely. What he did was, to complete his vow, he offered up his daughter for temple service for the Lord, which means she would not have been able to marry. She would have no children. His family line would end. Ironically, the very thing he sought to recover, his inheritance and his legacy and his children, he irresponsibly gives up because of a meaningless vow. Back in the beginning of this chapter, can you imagine Jephthah's brothers when they drove him out of his house? I doubt if it was polite, right? Excuse me, Jephthah, it's your time to leave. No. Your mother is a so-and-so, and we don't want no part of you around here. You worthless. Get out. It says that he gathered with, or that worthless fellows gathered around him. Would you agree that if you've been called worthless, treated as if you are worthless, if you believe that you are worthless, then you would tend to gather worthless fellows around you? See, the tragedy of Act 2 is that Jephthah's past wounds have caught up to him, his feelings of worthlessness. Because, see, behind every story there is a past, and for some of us, it leaves us with a feeling of worthlessness. A couple thoughts on why some of you right now maybe are experiencing this overwhelming feeling of worthlessness. And this may be your act. This may be what you need to hear today. One is unfair criticism. Somewhere along the line, someone told you that you don't measure up, that you don't have what it takes. Maybe it came in the form of a verbal assault. I wish you were more like so-and-so. I hate you. You're ugly. I wish I'd never even had you. And now internally, those words have been buried deep in your soul, and you play them over and over and over in your mind. The second one is this. Maybe you had an unstable upbringing. Jephthah was dealt a bad hand. When we act foolishly like Jephthah's father did, whether or not we're convinced it's his life and he's not hurting anybody, it hurts. And Jephthah was hurt. If you grew up in an unstable environment, unstable home environment, it can leave you with feelings of worthlessness. I'm talking to the young ladies out there right now. If you grew up in an unstable situation with your dad, you tend to carry this worthlessness around. You do. 3, unwise comparisons. We look around and what we do is we compare ourselves to others, and it leaves us feeling worthless. I don't have enough friends. I'm not as successful as this person. My job isn't nearly as important as everybody else. I'm not in very good shape, and I'm not really funny like a lot of my friends. And this leads us into this cycle of, well, in fact, then I'm boring, and I'm ugly, and my job is meaningless, and I'm a failure. See how these comparisons to other people can crush us. And I have to say, I think social media can add to this, because we look at what others are doing on Facebook, right? Oh, look at that. They're having a nice night out, and they're traveling, and oh, look at that perfect little family photo they got going there. And then we look at our lives, and we say, I'm a loser. Pastor Craig Rochelle at Life Church says this: we compare others' highlight reels with our behind the scenes. See, we look at everyone else's high points, and we contrast them with our low points, and we walk away feeling worthless. So when this happens, when we do this, when we begin to tell ourselves that we are worthless, it blocks God from telling you who you really are. See, how can you bust out of this attitude of feeling worthless? Well, here's a couple thoughts, and maybe one of these is for you today. One is God's view of you is different than your view of yourself. I promise you that God sees more in you than you see in yourself. God saw more in Jephthah than the son of a prostitute. Ephesians 2:10 says this: for we are God's what? Masterpiece. He created us anew in Christ Jesus so that we can do the good things he planned for us long ago. You may have received unfair criticism. You may have had an unstable upbringing. You may have find yourself making unwise comparison, but God's view of you is different than your view of yourself. You are a masterpiece, and he's got good things planned for you. And the second one on this is God's view of you is different than the view of others of you. I don't know if I said that right. God's view of you is different than others' view of you. Others do not see you the way God sees you. Some of you that know your Bible pretty well here today. Well, what did others think of Rahab from the Old Testament? They saw a prostitute, but God saw someone whose heart would turn to him, that would marry a godly man named Salmon, that through her genealogy would come Jesus, the Savior of the world. Others saw a prostitute, and God saw divine potential. Others looked at King David, right, and saw this little shepherd boy. And God saw a man that could stand up to a giant. When Peter messes up again and again in the New Testament, never seemed to be able to get it right, what did Jesus see in Peter? Jesus saw a rock. Some of you, this is the reason that you are here this weekend, is to hear this. Look up at me and listen. God sees more in you than you see in yourself, and certainly more than others see of you. And 3, just to bring it down a second, just grab a hold of this. Folks, it's less about you than you think. Verse 29, it affirmed that the Spirit was upon Jephthah. Folks, the battle was already his, but that wasn't enough for him. He did not trust God, and he made that foolish vow. Well, when God calls you to do something, he promises to be with you. And that point right there, it's less about you and more about him. It's about his strength, not yours. His power, not yours. I'll just be real honest with you. I feel completely unworthy to be the lead pastor of Northway. I know what my internal self says about me, and I know what others have said about me. I'm not good enough to do this. But the good news is, it's not about me. The Spirit of God is in me. So I'm going to work hard and do my part, but I got chosen to do it, so now it's on God, right? Do you get that? If God called you to do something, it's not about you at that point. It's now about him. His grace, his goodness, his calling, his power. Step into that and you can do anything. You are not what others say that you are. You are God's masterpiece. So Act 3 of this story. The Ammonites, chapter 12, verse 1 now, okay? The men of Ephraim, okay, no, wait, so let me pause. Jephthah defeated the Ammonites, peace in the land, right? Here's what happens. Verse 1. The men of Ephraim were called to arms, and they crossed to Zaphon and said to Jephthah, "Why did you cross over to fight against the Ammonites and did not call us to go with you? We will burn your house over you with fire." And Jephthah said to them, "I and my people had a great dispute with the Ammonites, and when I called you, you did not save me from their hand. And when I saw that you would not save me, I took my life in my hand, and I crossed over against the Ammonites, and the Lord gave them into my hand. Why then have you come up against me this day to fight against me?" So the Israelite tribe of Ephraim is offended that they didn't get called, at least by their perspective, or invited into the battle against the Ammonites. And Jephthah says, "Well, wait a minute, I called you guys, and you didn't come." And I kid you not, what happens next? Civil war. And 42,000 men from Ephraim are slaughtered by Jephthah's clan. And this raises, an important question for this final act of this story. Why are we so easily offended? Can I ask you a question, and I really need you to be honest with yourself here. Are you easily offended? Do you pick up offenses and carry them with you? Maybe you weren't invited or asked or told about something. How dare they? Right? I can't believe she said that. I can't believe he did that. How dare they? Well, why do we do this? Because we're living out of our egos. We want to be right. We want to win. So for us to be right, that means someone has to be wrong. For us to win, someone has to lose. Some people wake up looking for something wrong, looking for something to offend them. They walk into a gathering and their ears and their eyes are perked up and they're looking for an offense. What can I call out? What can I judge? What can I find that offends me? And some folks I know, they chalk this up as some kind of moral crusade or moral ground that they're standing on. I think it's more about ego. I have found in life that being an angry activist is the easiest thing to do. Listening and understanding and grace are the harder things to do. The men of Ephraim became angry activists. And their being offended cost them 42,000 of their men. Proverbs 19:11 says this, "Good sense makes one slow to anger, and it is his glory to overlook," what? "An offense." See, we live in a world that is so quick to call a foul, quick to judge, quick to be offended, but very slow to overlook an offense. This word actually in Hebrew, it means to pass over an offense, to catch some spiritual height, to rise up above and pass over the offense. See, when we are easily offended, we are living out of ourself instead of out of the grace of God. I love Romans 12, verse 3. "For by the grace given to me, I say to every one among you, not to think of himself more highly than he ought to think." So how can we get less offended by everything? One, we have to realize because of Christ's grace to me, I will give others the benefit of the doubt. Hear me on this. See, I think that we often want to judge others by their actions, but we would prefer that we be judged based on our intentions. Well, what do I mean by that? To others, it's, I can't believe they did what they did. But to ourselves, it's like, well, I know what I did, but that's not what I intended to do. I mean, that's not the way I meant it, right? So, see, we want to be cut some slack on our mistakes because that's not what we intended. But see, we want to judge others based on the action, not their intention. Folks, people make mistakes. You know, I've had days in my life as my role of lead pastor here that I call 100 decision days. There are days where I feel like I'm faced with 100 decisions. And I might get 99 of them right, but the one I miss will offend the person who is looking to be offended. Can I press you on something? Maybe the last time you were offended by someone, could it just possibly be that they were having a bad day? Could it be that something's going on in their kids' lives and it just got them all crazy? Could it be maybe they just got a bad report from a doctor? Could it be that they just had a 100 decision day and they missed one? We gotta have thick skin and a soft heart. But too often I think we walk around with thin skin and a hard heart. Colossians 3:13 says, "Make allowance for each other's faults and forgive anyone who offends you. Remember, the Lord forgave you, so you must forgive others. Because of Christ's grace to me, I will forgive as I've been forgiven." Sometimes we need to look over offenses, to pass over them, to gain some spiritual altitude and say to ourselves, really? Is this something I've got to carry around? And give someone the benefit of the doubt. You know, when I kick off the Easter series in a month or so, I'm going to do a sermon on righteous anger. Because I think there are times to get upset. There are times for righteous anger, but not all the time. And not even most of the time. It should be the rare time. See, in the Act 3 of this story, the tragedy concludes with God's people at war with God's people. And I've said this during this series before. There is no greater harm done to the Christian world than when believers fight believers. When Christians pick up offenses, engage in battle with other Christians. Folks, we've got to stop walking into church looking to pick up an offense. We have got to stop talking poorly about other churches or other denominations. We must give fellow believers the benefit of the doubt and find a place in our heart to forgive. And I believe at times, man, seriously, the Christian world, I think sometimes it's the most easily offended group of people I know. And we shouldn't be because we're forgiven. And people are watching us. And when we fight with each other, it gives some folks maybe pause that might be searching for a church. It gives someone the reason that if they were wounded in a church before, not to even think about returning. And frankly, it gives mockers ammunition for scoffing at our God. Was there something in one of those three acts for you? It wasn't from me, it was from God. Act 1 of this story basically says, live wisely and humbly before the Lord. Don't be simple or as a fool or as a mocker. Act 2 said this, you are not worthless. God sees you as a masterpiece. He sees more in you than you ever will in yourself. And 3, overlook, rise above offenses of fellow believers. As followers of Christ, we have such a wonderful message for the world, don't we? And when we fight with one another, it makes that message unattractive. It does. Let me close with one more scripture over you. Ephesians 4:32. Be kind to one another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another as God in Christ forgave you. Will you stand up with me?